I worked offshore for almost 6 years, mostly stationed in the Gulf of Mexico. It was grueling work, 12-hour shifts, deafening engines, and the constant smell of salt and diesel. But what I experienced during one stormy week in 2017 still keeps me from sleeping when the wind howls. It started with the water. That morning, the ocean looked wrong. Not wild, just dead. No gulls, no waves, no movement. The air felt heavier, like the sky was pressing down on us. Even the seasoned guys stayed quiet during breakfast. By evening, the waves had turned black, not from oil, just dark, unnatural. The rig lights made the water shimmer like something was moving beneath the surface. Around 11 p.m., we were doing a pressure check when Torres, one of the deckhands, leaned over the railing and froze. He whispered, "Something's down there." At first, I thought he was joking. But when I looked, I saw it too. A huge shape gliding just below the waterline, slow, silent. It was longer than any shark I'd ever seen, maybe 40 feet or more. It circled the rig once, then vanished. The next day, Torres didn't show up for shift. We searched the whole platform, bunks, engine room, storage. Nothing. One of the night crew said he'd seen Torres outside on the lower deck around 3 a.m., staring into the sea again. We radioed it in. The Coast Guard said they'd send a search team, but storms delayed them by 2 days. During that time, weird things started happening. We heard banging on the hull at night, like something was hitting the rig from below. Massive, rhythmic thuds that made the metal tremble. Some guys swore they saw water dripping from the ceiling in the mess hall, even though there were no pipes above. On the third night, the power flickered. The entire rig went dark for maybe 10 seconds. I remember stepping outside, and in the glow of the emergency lights, I saw something rising from the black water. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't anything I can name. It had pale, slick skin stretched over a massive shape, with what looked like arms long enough to touch the platform beams. Its head, if you could call it that, had holes where eyes should be. I remember hearing the metal shriek as it gripped the lower deck. Then the lights came back, and it was gone. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, they said Torres must have fallen. An accidental disappearance. But here's the part that never made it to the report. Divers found deep gouges on the rig's support legs, 40 feet below the surface. The marks were too high for any submarine, and too deep for any shark. We finished the job and flew back to shore a week later. That night in my bunk, I dreamt of Torres, standing on the deck, drenched in seawater, whispering just one thing before he vanished into the dark. "It's still down there." I was a maintenance tech on an offshore platform about 120 miles off the Louisiana coast. The kind of rig where the only view you get is endless water in every direction, and after a few days that emptiness starts to get inside your head. This story happened during my second hitch 14 days straight on the rig. It was my third night on rotation, the graveyard shift. The air was still unusually quiet. Even the turbines seemed to hum softer than usual. Around 1 a.m., I was on inspection duty, walking the outer catwalks with my flashlight, checking valves and gauges. It was routine work, except that night, something didn't feel right. The sea was calm, but I kept hearing faint pops, like distant static crackles, coming from the dark horizon. At first, I thought it was just radio interference. But then I saw them, lights. Tiny white lights flickering way out in the distance, just above the surface of the water. They weren't from another rig or a ship. They were moving slow, smooth, in perfect formation. For maybe 5 of them, hovering. I called it in to the control room, but the comms were acting up, full of static. I remember saying, "You guys seeing this?" and getting nothing but hiss in return. When I looked again, the lights had drifted closer, still low to the water, still silent, and then they blinked out. All of them. The sea went black. A few minutes later, I started back toward the main platform. That's when the emergency beacon above me flickered twice, and suddenly, the lights were back. But this time, they weren't in the distance. They were right beneath the rig. Through the metal grating under my boots, I could see that same pattern of glowing white orbs swirling slowly in the dark water, like they were circling the platform. I froze. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. It was like the lights were pulling at me. Hypnotic. Then the platform shuddered. A deep, metallic groan echoed from below. Something massive had brushed against the rig legs. I dropped my flashlight, and as it rolled across the deck, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A shape in the water, faintly illuminated by those lights. It looked human, but not quite. Too long, too thin, and moving wrong. I ran back inside. When I reached the control room, everyone was staring at the monitors. One of the underwater cameras, the one that faced the southwest support, was showing the lights, perfectly arranged like a pattern hovering around one of the legs. Then one by one the cameras went dark. Static. Then black. We lost feed for 6 minutes. When the system came back, the lights were gone. But the water around the rig had turned cloudy, like something had stirred up the seafloor. The supervisor told us to log it as an electrical anomaly. That's the phrase they use when they can't explain something. The next morning, a diver was sent down for inspection. He came back pale, shaking. He said the metal on one of the support legs was covered in something thick and slick. Not oil, not algae. Something that looked alive. He refused to go back down. A few months later, that same rig was decommissioned early. Official reason: structural integrity issues. But I know what I saw that night. Those lights weren't from any vessel, drone, or submersible. They were something else. And sometimes, when I drive along the coast late at night, I swear I see those same faint white dots hovering far out at sea, waiting. The oil rig I worked on in 2014 was an old one. Built back in the late 80s, patched up so many times it creaked with every gust of wind. It was called Haven 12, but most of us called it the Ghost Dock, because every guy who worked there swore they'd seen or heard something they couldn't explain. Started with a name, Charlie. Every old-timer talked about him. A welder who supposedly fell overboard years ago during a supply transfer. They said the waves were rough that night, and by the time anyone noticed he was missing, it was too late. His body was never found. Officially, it was listed as a lost-at-sea accident. But the weird part? No one could agree on when it happened. Some said 2005. Others claimed they'd met Charlie years later, working night shift. That should have been impossible. I didn't believe any of it. Not until my 3rd week on board. One night, during inspection, I was walking down one of the lower corridors, the kind lined with old pipes and humming generators. The whole hallway was warm from the heat exchangers. Then suddenly, the lights flickered, and the air went cold. Not like a draft. Like the temperature just dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I was halfway down the corridor when I noticed someone ahead of me. A man in a welding jacket, back turned, helmet on. Sparks flickered around him, like he was repairing something. I called out, "Hey, buddy, maintenance shift's over." He didn't answer, just kept working, shoulders jerking slightly. The metal smelled like burnt iron and ozone. When I got closer, maybe 10 feet away, he stopped. The torch light died. The helmet turned slowly toward me. There was no face, just darkness inside that mask. Deep, black, empty. I stumbled backward, hitting a valve well hard enough to bruise my shoulder. When I looked again, the hallway was empty. The air was warm again, and where the figure had been, the metal wall was scorched, like something had burned its outline into it. I ran straight to the control room. The night supervisor, Morales, listened quietly while I told him what happened. When I finished, he sighed and said, "You saw Charlie." He didn't even sound surprised. He pointed to the monitors, the security feed that covered the lower deck corridor. One camera, the one aimed right where I'd seen him, was covered in static. The next morning, Morales pulled me aside and told me something I'll never forget. Years earlier, a welder named Charlie had died there, but he hadn't fallen overboard. During a repair job, his torch line ruptured. He was caught in a flash fire. They couldn't recover him until the blaze was out. That section of the corridor had to be rebuilt. But sometimes, Morales said, when the power drops or the generators strain, you can still hear the sound of welding, faint, echoing through the pipes. That night, I stayed awake until dawn. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft hiss outside my cabin door, a faint flicker of orange light beneath the crack. I didn't open it. I didn't move, just listened to the rhythmic crackle of a torch, like someone was working in the hallway, one floor above the sea. The next morning, the floor outside my door had a single burn mark, shaped like the tip of a welding torch. I never went back to Haven 12 after that hitch. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my garage at night, I swear I smell that same mix of burnt metal and ozone. And I know somehow Charlie's still out there, welding in the dark. There's a part of every oil rig no one talks about, the lower deck. It's where they keep the old storage tanks, broken valves, and flooded maintenance rooms that haven't been used in years. On Rig Harker 7, that place was called the Silent Deck. And we were told, never go down there after midnight. I thought that was just a joke, a scare tactic for new recruits. But after what happened on my third week out there, I never laughed about it again. It started when one of the compressors on level 2 started malfunctioning. The supervisor, Glenn, sent me and another tech, Marcus, to check the feed lines. The schematics said the valve system ran through the lower deck, so we took the maintenance stairs down. Place I'd never been before. The moment we stepped through the hatch, everything changed. No sound from the engines. No humming of generators. Just silence. Our boots splashed into cold water that came up to our ankles. The smell of metal and salt thick in the air. We followed the main corridor until we came to a rusted door with an old sign barely visible under the corrosion. It read, "Keep out, decommissioned section." Marcus grinned and said, "Guess this is where they keep the ghosts." I laughed nervously, trying to play along, but the air felt wrong, thick and still. When we turned the latch, it gave way with a groan that echoed down the corridor. Behind that door was a long room filled with half-submerged machinery. Everything inside looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But there was something else, faintly scratched into the wall near the far corner. A single word, "Listen." We waded in, the water rippling against our legs. Every sound we made echoed unnaturally, like the walls were swallowing our voices. Marcus was halfway across when he stopped and whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first I thought it was the pipes shifting, but then I heard it. Faint murmurs, like whispers coming from beneath the water. Dozens of them, some slow, some overlapping, like a crowd of people talking below the surface. We froze. The voices got louder, more frantic, until the water began to vibrate around our boots. Marcus shouted, "Let's go!" and turned toward the door, but the latch had slammed shut on its own. We pulled, kicked, slammed, nothing. The whispers were now words. I couldn't make them all out, but one voice was clear, whispering right by my ear. "Stay down." Marcus screamed. The water behind him rippled violently, and something pale reached up from underneath. A hand. It grabbed his leg and yanked hard. He fell with a splash, kicking and thrashing as the water swallowed him up to his chest. I lunged forward, grabbed his arm, but it was ice cold, slick with something oily. He screamed again, "It's pulling me down." Then silence. The water went still. I stood there, panting, calling his name again and again. No answer. When I finally backed toward the door, it suddenly creaked open by itself. I stumbled out and slammed the hatch shut behind me. Glenn and 2 others found me an hour later wandering the mid-level stairs, soaking wet and shaking. When they went down to look for Marcus, the lower deck was bone dry. No water, no flooded room, just dust and rust. They searched for 2 days. Never found him. A week later, the new compressor technician was assigned Marcus's bunk. He told me he kept hearing water dripping from the ceiling above his bed. But there were no pipes there. No leaks. Just a slow, steady drip that stopped only when he turned off the light. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear those whispers under the water. And one voice always stands out, "Stay down." It was the middle of the North Sea, late winter of 2018. Our rig, Orion Delta, was halfway through a drilling phase when the weather turned. Winds howled through the antennas. The waves slammed against the legs, and visibility dropped to nothing but black rain and flashes of lightning. When storms hit that hard, communication is everything. We rely on shortwave radios to talk between decks since the intercoms cut out often. That night, around 2:15 a.m., we lost both radio and internal lines, almost simultaneously. I was in the control room with Jensen, our comms tech. He kept adjusting the frequency, trying to raise the satellite line back to the mainland. Static. Nothing but white noise. Then, through the hiss, we heard something. Faint ping like sonar, followed by a male voice, deep, slow, mechanical, repeating our rig's call sign.
Orion Delta, come in.
At first, Jensen thought it was the Coast Guard relaying through backup frequency. He answered, "This is Orion Delta. Go ahead." No response. Just a long burst of static. Then that same voice again. "Orion Delta, power down engines. Open Channel 6. The problem? Channel 6 isn't used anymore. It's been dead since the 90s. It doesn't even exist on modern rigs." Jensen looked at me, pale. "Someone's messing with us," he whispered. But when he tried to switch channels, the dial spun on its own. Click, 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 back to 6. And then we heard it. Knocking. 3 short knocks, not over the radio, but from inside the control room wall. We froze. The knocking came again, this time closer. Jensen turned toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the control room window behind him, a tall, thin figure standing by the door. No face, just the faint outline of a human shape, dripping water onto the floor. The lights flickered. When they came back on, it was gone. But the radio kept whispering, over and over. "Power down. Open Channel 6. Jensen grabbed the main power lever, yanked it down, and everything went dark. Only the glow of the radar remained, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. That's when we saw it on the radar. A blip, about 200 meters west of the rig, moving closer, slowly. We thought maybe it was a lost vessel or debris. But then it stopped right under the rig, directly beneath us. Could be a sub, Jensen said, trying to convince himself. But there hadn't been a submarine in that sector in years. And then the sonar pinged again, not from the radio but from the floor. A deep, metallic boom that vibrated through our boots. "Something's down there," I whispered. Jensen started shaking. "I'm cutting the feed." He reached for the power again. And that's when the door behind him slammed shut. The power cut out completely. No lights, no radar, just the wind and the roar of the sea. When I finally got the emergency flashlight on, Jensen was gone. His headset lay on the floor, still hissing with static. Through the storm, I ran to the outer deck. The ocean below was pitch black, except for one faint, circular glow in the water. It was pulsing, almost like it was breathing. Then, over the radio headset still around my neck, I heard Jensen's voice. Distant, crackling, almost robotic. "Orion Delta, open Channel 6. I ripped the headset off and threw it into the sea. The glow faded. The storm passed an hour later. They searched every inch of the rig for Jensen. Never found him. But the next night, the comms line reconnected automatically. And on the log screen, one message had been received at 3:16 a.m. Orion Delta signal received. Transmission complete. Which story scared you the most? Comment below. And subscribe for more true horror stories from the darkest places on Earth.